Good afternoon. I am Dr. Sarah Abosh Jacobson, the Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer here at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And I would like to thank you for joining us for our 7th and final installment of the 2021 Summer Survivor Speaker Series. Today, you will hear from Mrs. Magie Furst, a Kindertransportee who, along with her brother Bert and mother Sita, fled Nazi Germany for Great Britain in 1938. Magie will share her experiences with you this afternoon. She was born in Astheim, Germany in 1929. When she was 9 years old, her mother made arrangements for the family to escape to England by obtaining a visa for herself and securing spots for Magie and her brother Bert on the Kindertransport, a rescue mission that allowed thousands of Jewish children to live in England with private citizens during World War II and the Holocaust. Magie and her family were able to move to the United States towards the end of the war, and eventually they settled in Dallas. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Summer Survivor Speaker Series: Cristo Rey Dallas, Jewish Family Service of Greater Dallas, Legacy Senior Communities, Mosaic Family Services, Refugee Services of Texas, Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission. We are grateful for your support, as it makes this program possible, and we couldn't do it without you. Magie will share her story with you for about 45 or 50 minutes, and then we will have time for questions and answers. To ask her a question, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It's a little icon there, and type in your questions. And during the Q&A session, we will get to as many of those as we possibly can. So help me welcome Magie.
It has been a while since I talked to you, and many things have happened this past year. Hopefully everybody is well, and we will proceed. Now, I am going to be talking to you about my experience in Germany during the Hitler era and subsequently leaving on the Kindertransport to a haven in Great Britain. I was born in Germany, but I am now an American Jew for many years. Jews have lived in Germany since Roman times. In Germany, the Jewish population was well integrated by the end of the 19th century until the rise of the Nazis. Jews were part of the mainstream in Germany. Jews were professors at universities, lawyers, doctors, writers, and scientists. Many of the department stores had Jewish owners, as well as the banks. Mixed marriages were common. In general, the Jewish community consisted of Reform Jews, although there were some Orthodox congregations. Our father, Alfred Romberg, was born in Diepholz, Germany, a small town not far from Essen. He was one of 13 children. His parents were Friederike and Julius Romberg, my paternal grandparents. Our mother, Sita Rothschild, was born to Katinka and Benjamin Rothschild in the village of Astheim, Germany, not far from Mainz, of Gutenberg Bible fame. She was one of 4 children. Our dad fought the German in the First World War, fought for Germany in the First World War. He was wounded and awarded the Iron Cross, the highest medal given. When he met our mother, he was a handsome young bank officer in Essen. They fell in love and married in 1927. They lived in Astheim in our grandparents' house. He joined the family business and became co-owner upon the death of my grandfather in 1929. He took over the successful grain, feed, and general merchandise store. I was born in 1929, and my brother Bert was born in 1930. In 1933, after Hitler came to power, our dad was harassed endlessly by stormtroopers who marched in front of our house and business day and night, shouting Nazi slogans, causing him great distress, which eventually killed him. He had a fatal heart attack in March of 1934. At that time, I was 4.5 years old and Bert was 3.5 years old. Mama never got over our father's death. I found some old newspapers she had saved, which describes the funeral cortege moving through the village. Stones and insults were thrown at the mourners. I started school in Astheim, and as far as I can remember, I was well treated by my fellow schoolmates. We also played behind closed doors with our neighbors' children. These same neighbors supplied us with food, milk, butter, and other essentials through a common basement wall into which we had made a hole. They supported us through many trials, as they had in years past. We had a teenager named Elizabeth, whom we called Leah, who took care of us while Mama and our grandmother worked in the store. Mama struggled to keep the business afloat, but as the anti-Semitic Nuremberg laws were passed, the farmers no longer paid their debts to Jews. She was forced to sell the business for a pittance. In 1936, we moved to Eschwege, near Kassel, with a good-sized Jewish population for moral support. My Aunt Paula lived there with her family. We tried to overcome the adverse conditions. Mama had to take in laundry and sewing to support us. She was ordered to go to Gestapo headquarters and hand over all our valuables. After 3 tries, we finally found an apartment that was Jewish owned, which we shared with another Jewish family. We were unable to attend secular schools and had to attend a Jewish school. The trouble was we were all in one classroom, so you can imagine how much we learned. Well, I know that I had a great lot of fun in that classroom because we didn't do anything but play hide and seek and things like that. And the teachers didn't do too much to stop us. After Crystal Night, there was no school, nor was there a synagogue to attend. It was November the 9th, 1938. Everything that was Jewish owned was burned, destroyed, and in ruins. Houses were ransacked. Jewish men and teenagers were dragged off to newly established concentration camps. Our cousin Henry, 14 years old, was dragged off across the town square. By December the 13th, 1938, Jewish industries and shops were seized. Living conditions in Eschwege were going from hard to worse. We could not go out without being beaten up by the Hitler Youth. Some of the men were eventually released from the concentration camps in terrible physical conditions. Some came home in urns. Most of them tried to leave the country as soon as possible to whomever would take them in. But many had no means and had no guarantor and despaired, often committing suicide. There were many countries that did not want Jewish immigrants. We are convinced that Mama made a decision after Crystal Night that she could no longer risk her children's lives in Nazi Germany. Our father had a sister and her family living in Stockholm since 1928. Mama appealed to them for a visa for Bert and myself. Following Crystal Night and appeals by Jewish committees and a debate in Parliament, the British government agreed to admit up to 10,000 children from Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. The Austria had been overrun by the Nazis by that time, and also Czechoslovakia. A 50-pound bond per child was posted to guarantee their eventual fare to some other country. The British International Interaid Committee was established. Their goal was to rescue 50,000 children. They were mostly Jewish, but there were some non-Aryan Christian children. Parliament passed an emergency measure to permit these children to enter the United Kingdom. The condition were they had to be potty trained, alone, under 17 years of age, and only 2 per family. They figured it would cost a minimum of £25 per year to maintain each child. This was a lot of money at that time. The British people came forth and opened their hearts and homes. Only 9,354 children were actually saved, usually rounded out to 10,000 by the time the war broke out. The first transport of 196 children were from a Jewish orphanage in Berlin on December the 2nd, 1938. So that was barely a month since Kristallnacht. So they worked very fast. The last transport left with a Dutch Christian lady, 25 years old. Her name was Truus Weismiller. She faced Eichmann in Vienna and brought out 600 children on one train. My brother and I received our visas to go to Sweden 3 days before Mama got permission from London to work in the household of her cousins the Lowenthals, who had emigrated to Great Britain in 1934. They were instrumental in getting her out and getting us under the Kindertransport. We were overjoyed that we could all be in Britain. Of course, saying goodbye to all our relatives was very sad. Our grandmother was only 69 years old the last time we saw her. She went to the old age home in Frankfurt, and from there she was deported. She had always been a part of our lives, as had all our other relatives. We left with one small suitcase each, about the size you take onto Southwest Airlines. Not very big. Little children can't carry big suitcases. That was in April of 1939. The night before we left, I cleaned out my suitcase and threw my underwear out and put my dolly in there. Who needs underwear? All the clothes we wore were made by our mother and grandmother. We had 10 marks for each of us. We could not take out more money out of the country. Even in those days, there wasn't much money. And today it's nothing. We had little else with us. The scene at the railroad station wasn't very happy. Some parents held on to their children and didn't want to let them go. Others ran off without saying goodbye. Some didn't even come to the station. Most of the children were not as upset as the parents. After all, this was a big adventure for us. We were going on a holiday. The train went forward with a lurch and we were on our way. I can't remember too much about the train ride, except when it suddenly stopped. I heard the Gestapo boots coming into our compartment. Looking into our suitcases, they screamed at us, "You Jewish dogs, do you have any diamonds?" Now, who in the world would have thought about anything like that for children? Would have been insane to have contraband with us. Besides, I doubt if there were any Jews left in Germany in 1939 who still had diamonds. Finally, we continued on and crossed the border into Holland. The first stop we came to, there were smiling Dutch angels handing us hot chocolate and fruit that the Jews were not allowed to have. Tropical fruits, for instance, and vegetables not grown in Germany. I had my first orange in Holland, and I got a big hug. No one spat in our faces. The train continued on to Hoek van Holland, the port for Rotterdam. We boarded a little ship and crossed the English Channel at night. We arrived in Harwich on the East Coast early in the morning. It was a glorious, bright, sunshiny English day, May 23rd, 1939. We were directed to another train bound for Liverpool Street Station in London. Mama's cousins picked us up in a beautiful new car. As soon as we were on the way, my brother Bert threw up on the cousin's wife's new shoes. The next shock came as the uncle announced that he was bankrupt and had sold the house. But Mama could stay and work for the new owners who were due to arrive from Vienna next week. After a few weeks, Mama had a nervous breakdown, but she persevered and came through it. What could she do? She had no money. She couldn't go back to Germany. So she did the best she could to recuperate. Another dilemma. Bert and I had no lodgings. Uncle knew the president of the Coventry Synagogue, and between the two of them, they found homes for 55 children. Bert was eventually sent to Shepherds. There was Mom and Pop, Peter their son, and Mary their daughter. They called him Bertie. Pop was a mailman, and Mom became a bus conductor at the onset of war. The Simons, where I went to live, were Jewish and better off financially than the Shepherds, but treated me very poorly. I became a cheap maid. Bert and I lived only a few blocks apart, and we went to the same school, but saw each other only during class breaks or at Hebrew school. Once a week, I had to cook and clean when I came home from school. At 10 years old, I was not very adept in the kitchen. Actually, I was a pretty terrific cook. I was very consistent. I burned the meat every day. To correct it, I took newspapers out and put them on the floor and turned the pot upside down, scraped the black off the meat, and put it back in the same burnt pot, not knowing that using the same burnt pot doesn't improve the taste. Anyway, they ate it. Now, either they had no taste buds or they were stupid or both. In school, I was not too happy either. My English was not too swift as yet. Luckily for me, there was a Jewish teacher, a Mrs. Jacobs, who took me under her wing. The headmistress's name was Miss Smith, and try as I might, it came out as Miss Smith, to the delight of the other children, which made me cry. So eventually I adapted to my new surroundings. And by the time the war broke out on September the 1st, 1939, I spoke no more German. I wouldn't have dared. The English hated the Boche. That was a term from the French that the that they adapted for the Germans. I was able to speak English in 3 months. I had no one to speak German to. I'm sure I must have had a very heavy accent, but I carried on. My unhappiness with the Simon family wasn't helped by the fact that I was the scapegoat for their children's misbehavior. John was 2 years older than I, and Esther was 2 years younger. John teased me incessantly. Esther and I shared one bed, which she wet every night. I took my pillow and my blankets and I wrapped myself in my coat and slept on the floor. English houses are ice cold, and even today, they don't warm their houses the way we do. So our homes don't don't go to Great Britain in the wintertime unless you want to be cold. As the war progressed, the English needed factory workers. Mama found a factory job. Now she could support herself and rented rooms with 3 other refugee friends. But she still did not have enough money to support Bert and myself. She took in work at night and saved enough money to dream about going to the United States. What a dream. Mama showed me 2 telegrams she received from the Swiss Red Cross. She had asked about our relatives. They came back as undeliverable. I knew that she was worried, but in my childish way, I assured her the British would work hard to help everybody. That was a dream, but the British did work very hard to do the best they could. Bert and I went to visit Mama whenever we had a school break, despite the fact that the bombing had started. We were so happy when we were together. When it came time to go back to Coventry, as soon as the train started to move, Bert started to cry, and I, the brave one, started to cry with him all the way back. Coventry was the favorite target of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. They were aiming for the Triumph Motor Works and the Jaguar plant, which had converted to war weapons. But instead, they destroyed the center of the beautiful city, including the centuries-old cathedral. Then they came back a week later and finished it off. That was November the 14th, 1940. There were many casualties. The destruction was devastating. All communication in and out of the city were cut, but the British kept a stiff upper lip. The Simons house was damaged the first time around, and we had evacuated to a small village near Banbury in the vicinity of Oxford. Finally, the Red Cross was able to connect us to each other, our mother in London and Bert in a damaged house in Coventry. The conditions we were living under only made my distaste for Mr. Simon more pronounced. He was an abuser, and I was petrified, but had no escape. My writing paper, my only means of communication with my mother, and my stamps had mysteriously disappeared. I had to wait until we went to London again. Then I did not go back to the Simons. Mama went to the Bloomsbury House, an affiliation of HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, who were there to help the refugees. Between the two of them, they found me a wonderful boarding school, which had been evacuated to Hertfordshire near Cambridge from London. I finally started to blossom and live like a human being. The school was situated on an estate belonging to a British colonel fighting in North Africa. He had loaned the estate to the London County Council for the duration of the war. The teachers were like mothers to us. There were 36 girls, and 2 of us were Jewish, and 2 of us were from the Spanish Civil War. I was well treated and didn't mind doing my share to keep the house and grounds in good shape. I took care of Alma the goat. Alma and I had a good relationship. We talked to each other. Although she smelled like a goat, I didn't care. I was happy. Now, all of you go home and get rid of that dog. The dog doesn't mow the lawn. The goat will eat the grass. You don't have to take the goat every week to the vet. The goat will give you the most wonderful milk and cheese. Best of all, you won't have to pick up after the goat because every day you can use the droppings for fertilizer on your garden. So see all the advantages? In the meantime, Bert was sent to a warm and loving family in Hartford, not far from me. Mama was afraid he might be converted. It was time for his bar mitzvah. He went to live with the Pettit family. They were extraordinary people. Mrs. Pettit slept on the floor when our mother came to visit to get some respite from the bombing. I was only able to stay in school until I was 14 and a half years old because the school was not equipped to teach beyond that age. Unless you had a scholarship or money, you went to work. There was war to be won, and school was not the English priority at this time. I returned to London and went to work for a dentist. The first day on the job, I cleaned up the glass from a bomb which had fallen on the field across from the office. I also burned out the x-ray machine the first day, but the dentist was very kind and did not reprimand me. Every night when the sirens went off, we went to the air raid shelter, except me. I thought I was immortal. Nothing was going to hurt me. One night, the ceiling caved in and the windows blew in, and I came very close to being cut very badly. After that, I was the first one in the air raid shelter every night. On June the 5th, 1944, it was D-Day, and the invasion of Europe began under General Dwight Eisenhower. Mama had started to inquire if we could go to the United States. Eventually, we did get our visas, even though the war was still on. It was a hard decision for Mama to make because of Bert's education, but she decided we would all have a better chance in the US. Bert got a scholarship that would have taken him all the way through Cambridge University, room and board and everything included. We left Britain with heavy hearts at the beginning of April 1945 on the old Aquitania, which is the sister ship of the Lusitania. This ship had been converted to a Canadian hospital ship. We sailed from Greenock, Scotland to Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I was seasick all the way over. From there, we traveled by train to Montreal, St. Albans, Vermont, to New York City. It was April the 12th, 1945, day before President Roosevelt died. The war was in its final stages in Europe. Mama's sister, brother, and their families welcomed us very warmly. The British were wonderful to us. We shall always be indebted to them for their indomitable spirit, their kindness and compassion. They saved our lives and those of many others. No other country in the world would take in Jewish refugees. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in the world. A few countries made a little easier, such as Chile, Costa Rica, and the Belgian Congo. Even in this country, it was hard to get in. President Roosevelt had some members in his cabinet who didn't want Jews. There was no place for them to go when the Holocaust started. The greatest tragedy that ever befell the Jewish people. Some of the children that arrived on the Kindertransport were picked up by various agencies and placed in hostels. The younger ones went to families. Some of the older ones were taken in as household help or nannies. Others were placed with loving families all over the British Isles. They went to England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Some adjusted very well. Others had a hard time being torn away from their families. The younger ones forgot their parents very quickly. Some were converted to Christianity, were adopted by families who grew to love them as much or more than their own children. As they became older, some joined the armed forces and fought valiantly. Some fell in battle. Some joined the Jewish Brigade. After the war, a few were reunited with their families or siblings, but most of the uniting was very strained and difficult. The children had not seen their parents for at least 6 years. The parents had unspeakable horrors to deal with. Many had psychological or mental problems and could never get used to each other again. The children had also acquired a different culture and way of life. Most of the children never saw their dear ones again. All those who were left behind perished. In the summer of 1989, there was a 50-year reunion in London, which we attended. We were addressed by many dignitaries. Amongst them was Margaret Thatcher, the then Prime Minister. Of course, there were the countless ordinary people who gave us love and shelter, which can never be repaid. The Kindertransport is but a small part of Holocaust history, but an important one. We were the ones to whom nothing happened at all. But something did happen. We were spared the horrors of the death camps. We were uprooted, transported to a different culture, and faced not the horror of the camps, but very human mixture of kindness, indifference, occasional exploitation, and the selflessness of ordinary people faced with needy children. Many British values have stayed with us. Fair play comes to mind, and that's not cricket. We need to defend the helpless and stand our ground. Don't give in to bullies. Be kind to all people. Be sure to help your parents and your grandparents. Do some volunteer work. And whenever you can, save your money and give some to the Red Cross or the American Heart Association. Or you go to the food bank and help and make some sandwiches or help some other good cause. There are many homeless in our community. Most of all, work as hard as you can in school. If you don't get the first time, try again and again until you get it. Read as much as you can. It's very important that you do well in school. I can't emphasize that enough. Become aware of what goes around you. Become active. Don't be afraid to speak up. I had to go back to school when I came to New York. I went to Jamaica High School. Then I went to Queens College at night to take some courses. I had to work very hard because we had no money. So I worked after school every day. I worked for a dentist. In 1948, I met my husband at the beach in Far Rockaway. We married in 1949. Our children were born in New York. We came to Dallas in 1963. My husband was also a refugee child, but he was lucky enough to come to this beautiful country in 1937 with his parents. He went to the New York City schools. He was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1943 when he was 19. First, he was a dishwasher, then, he was a medic, and then he became a translator for General Patton when he went into Germany. And I have two wonderful grandchildren and a third granddaughter in law, and I'm a brand new great grandmother. I've been volunteering for the museum for about 20 years. I also did volunteer work for the Dallas County Probate Court for people who are under guardianship and for the Vogel Alcove, which is a daycare center for the children of the homeless. I make meals for people who are ill when I have time. I knit for cancer patients and for the homeless. I read a lot. I belong to a book club, and I go to Torah study in my synagogue as often as I can. I recently moved into a retirement home, and I have everything I need there for the rest of my life. But I'm very interested in all music, in all the museums in the Dallas and Fort Worth area, and in the opera. Above all, I always make sure that I have time for my family. And that is what I can relate to you now. So, any questions?
Thank you so much, Maggie, as always, for sharing your story with us. We do have some questions from the audience. The first question is, do you remember how you felt boarding the train on your journey to England? Were you scared, excited? Did you know what was happening?
Well, I didn't have the full knowledge of what was happening because we had lived under suppression for so long that just going on the train was big excitement for me. I thought I was going on a holiday, and it was a holiday compared to what we had lived in, the way we had lived. So it's excitement for a child to get on a train when they haven't had much the last few years.
Thank you, Maggie. We have another question. Did you make any friends while you were in England, either with other children who had come on the Kindertransport or English children that you were with?
Yes, I made many friends in England, and I kept up the relationship too. Uh, Unfortunately, all my friends have passed away in the meantime, so uh, I don't have anybody to correspond with anymore or to telephone anymore because they're all gone. I'm the oldest one.
Well, we're happy to have you with us, Maggie. Another question that someone asked is if any of your extended family that had remained in Germany survived. Did anyone survive the Holocaust?
Yes, I have one uncle. My father's youngest brother had a mixed marriage for his second wife, and because of her, I think he survived the Holocaust because he wasn't found until late in 1944, and then he was sent to a labor camp. And when the war ended, he had two children before the war broke out. Then he had two more children after the war, and one son who went to Israel. Um, and he lived to be another 10, 15 years after the war.
Thank you, Maggie. We have a couple questions about your family. Barbara asks if your mother ever remarried.
No, she did not. She had a very hard life, and all she wanted was to be with her children.
And another question, if you can tell us a little bit about your brother Bert and what he's up to now.
My brother Bert lives in Dallas. In fact, we live in the same facility where we moved to for in our retirement home, and he's still very active in the community. Um, he's just a year younger than I am, and he lives there with his wife, and he's got three grown daughters who are all doing very well. And hopefully he'll live to be 120 like Moses.
We have a question switching gears a little bit. Maggie, can you talk a little bit about what you think or feel about the recent rise of anti-Semitism? We're seeing some of this Holocaust distortion and denial. Are you worried something like that could happen again? What are your thoughts on that?
I am not as worried about this as a lot of people are. I don't think that anything of the size and outrage of the Hitler era could happen here. Although I am a little worried about the rise of anti-Semitism and about the damage that the far right has done so far in the general political era. But I think in the long run that we will probably, because of our democratic system, will prevail.
Thank you, Maggie. Another question. Why did you and your family ultimately come to Dallas? What brought you here?
Well, it's a very long story. I don't know how much time you have.
Can you give us the abridged version?
First of all, my brother was the one that came here through his work. The company that he worked for transferred him to Dallas. Then my husband didn't want to stay in New York because the life was very harried, and he thought he could raise his children in an atmosphere where they would be a little bit more quiet and a little healthier than living in New York. So he had a friend who worked in the import business, and he gave him a job. We had a choice between the Northwest, like in Midwest in Chicago, or going to the South. And I didn't want to shovel the snow anymore, so we didn't choose Chicago. And Bert and his family were here, and my mother was pining for her baby boy. And so we decided to come to Dallas. And since Bert was here, that was very enticing. And we decided to try it, and it didn't work out too well. The import business didn't work out too well because it was too big a territory to be able to make a living. So my husband went back to baking, which was his profession. And that's what he did for the rest of his life here. And we made a very comfortable a choice here. The children went through the Dallas schools, and eventually they did okay. And so we've been here for 61 years, so I guess it worked out.
I guess it worked out in the end. Maggie, I think we have one more question for you to end on, and that is, can you talk about what originally motivated you to tell your story with the museum or to other audiences, and what inspires you to continue to tell the story today?
Okay. I had a very guilty conscience about all that happening from the Second World War and before and after, and all the trials and tribulations that we went through. And I saw some of the survivors from the Dallas Jewish community, and they were starting out at the Jewish Community Center. Mark Jacobs was in that originally, and I watched him and I saw that he was trying very hard, and that really inspired me to do something. So I started very slowly and I just fell into it, and I felt it was my duty to do something. So that's how it started. And it's been going on for a good many years now, maybe 30 years or more.
Well, we're so grateful to still have you telling your story, Maggie. Thank you again for being here. Thank you to everyone watching today and everyone who's tuned in for other sessions of the Summer Survivor Speaker Series. We hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.